Article 1 of the United States Constitution establishes the legislative branch of the federal government, the United States Congress. The Congress is a bicameral legislature consisting of a House of Representatives and a Senate. Section 1, Legislative power vested in Congress. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. Section 1 is a vesting clause that bestows federal legislative power exclusively to Congress. Similar clauses are found in Articles 2 and 3. The former confers executive power upon the President alone, and the latter grants judicial power solely to the federal judiciary. These three articles create a separation of powers among the three branches of the federal government. This separation of powers, by which each department may exercise only its own constitutional powers and no others, is fundamental to the idea of a limited government accountable to the people. The separation of powers principle is particularly noteworthy in regard to the Congress. The Constitution declares that the Congress may exercise only those legislative powers herein granted within Article I, as later limited by the 10th Amendment. It also, by implied extension, prohibits Congress from delegating its legislative authority to either of the other branches of government, a rule known as the non-delegation doctrine. However, the Supreme Court has ruled that Congress does have latitude to delegate regulatory powers to executive agencies as long as it provides an intelligible principle which governs the agency's exercise of the delegated regulatory authority. That the power assigned to each branch must remain with that branch, and may be expressed only by that branch, is central to the theory. The non-delegation doctrine is primarily used now as a way of interpreting a congressional delegation of authority narrowly, in that the courts presume Congress intended only to delegate that which it certainly could have, unless it clearly demonstrates it intended to test the waters of what the courts would allow it to do. Although not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, Congress has also long asserted the power to investigate and the power to compel cooperation with an investigation. The Supreme Court has affirmed these powers as an implication of Congress's power to legislate. Since the power to investigate is an aspect of Congress's power to legislate, it is as broad as Congress's powers to legislate. However, it is also limited to inquiries that are in aid of the legislative function. Congress may not expose for the sake of exposure. It is uncontroversial that a proper subject of Congress's investigation power is the operations of the federal government, but Congress's ability to compel the submission of documents or testimony from the President or his subordinates is often discussed and sometimes controversial. See executive privilege, although not often litigated. As a practical matter, the limitation of Congress's ability to investigate only for a proper purpose, in aid of its legislative powers, functions as a limit on Congress's ability to investigate the private affairs of individual citizens, matters that simply demand action by another branch of government, without implicating an issue of public policy necessitating legislation by Congress, must be left to those branches due to the doctrine of separation of powers. The courts are highly deferential to Congress's exercise of its investigation powers. However, Congress has the power to investigate that which it could regulate, and the courts have interpreted Congress's regulatory powers broadly since the Great Depression. Section 2, House of Representatives. Clause 1, Composition and Election of Members. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. Section 2 provides for the election of the House of Representatives every second year. Since representatives are to be chosen by the people, state governors are not allowed to appoint temporary replacements when vacancies occur in a state's delegation to the House of Representatives. Instead, the governor of the state is required by Clause 4 to issue a writ of election calling a special election to fill the vacancy. At the time of its creation, the Constitution did not explicitly give citizens an inherent right to vote. Rather, it provided that those qualified to vote in elections for the largest chamber of a state's legislature may vote in congressional, House of Representatives, elections. Since the Civil War, Several constitutional amendments have been enacted that have curbed the state's broad powers to set voter qualification standards. Though never enforced, Clause 2 of the 14th Amendment provides that when the right to vote at any election for the choice of electors for President and Vice President of the United States, representatives in Congress, the executive and judicial officers of a state, or the members of the legislature thereof, is denied to any of the male inhabitants of such state, being 21 years of age, and citizens of the United States, or in any way abridged, except for participation in rebellion or other crime, the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state. The 15th Amendment prohibits the denial of the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 19th Amendment prohibits the denial of the right to vote based on sex. The 24th Amendment prohibits the revocation of voting rights due to the non-payment of a poll tax. The 26th Amendment prohibits the denial of the right of U.S. citizens, 18 years of age or older, to vote on account of age. Moreover, since the Supreme Court has recognized voting as a fundamental right, the Equal Protection Clause places very tight limitations, albeit with uncertain limits, on the state's ability to define voter qualifications. It is fair to say that qualifications beyond citizenship, residency, and age are usually questionable. In the 1960s, the Supreme Court started to view voting as a fundamental right covered by the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. In a dissenting opinion of a 1964 Supreme Court case involving reapportionment in the Alabama state legislature, Associate Justice John Marshall Harlan II included minor in a list of past decisions about voting and apportionment which were no longer being followed. In Oregon v. Mitchell, 1970, the Supreme Court held that the Qualifications Clause did not prevent Congress from overriding state-imposed minimum age restrictions for voters in congressional elections. Since Clause 3 provides that members of the House of Representatives are apportioned state by state and that each state is guaranteed at least one representative, exact population equality between all districts is not guaranteed and, in fact, is currently impossible, because while the size of the House of Representatives is fixed at 435, several states had less than 1/435 of the national population at the time of the last reapportionment in 2010. However, the Supreme Court has interpreted the provision of Clause 1 that representatives shall be elected by the people to mean that, in those states with more than one member of the House of Representatives, each congressional election district within the state must have nearly identical populations. Clause 2, Qualifications of Members. No person shall be a representative who shall not have attained to the age of 25 years, and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. The Constitution provides 3 requirements for representatives. A representative must be at least 25 years old, must be an inhabitant of the state in which he or she is elected, and must have been a citizen of the United States for the previous 7 years. There is no requirement that a representative reside within the district in which he or she represents, although this is usually the case. There have been occasional exceptions. The Supreme Court has interpreted the Qualifications Clause as an exclusive list of qualifications that cannot be supplemented by a House of Congress exercising its Section 5 authority to judge the qualifications of its own members or by a state in its exercise of its Section 4 authority to prescribe the times, places and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives. The Supreme Court, as well as other federal courts, have repeatedly barred states from additional restrictions, such as imposing term limits on members of Congress, allowing members of Congress to be subject to recall elections, or requiring that representatives live in the congressional district in which they represent. A 2002 Congressional Research Service report also found that no state could implement a qualification that a representative not be a convicted felon or incarcerated. However, the United States Supreme Court has ruled that certain ballot access requirements, such as filing fees and submitting a certain number of valid petition signatures, do not constitute additional qualifications, and thus few constitutional restrictions exist as to how harsh ballot access laws can be. Clause 3, Apportionment of representatives and taxes. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this Union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as they shall by law direct. The number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least 1 representative, and until such enumeration shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3. After much debate, the framers of the Constitution decided to make population the basis of apportioning the seats in the House of Representatives and the tax liability among the states. To facilitate this, the Constitution mandates that a census be conducted every 10 years to determine the population of each state and of the nation as a whole, and establishes a rule for who shall be counted or excluded from the count. As the new form of government would become operational prior to the completion of a national census, the Constitution also provides for a temporary apportionment of seats. Originally, the population of each state and of the nation as a whole was ascertained by adding to the whole number of free persons, 3/5 the number of all other persons, i.e. slaves, but excluding non-taxed Native Americans. This constitutional rule, known as the 3/5 Compromise, was a compromise between southern and northern states in which 3/5 of the population of slaves would be counted for enumeration purposes and for the apportionment of seats in the House of Representatives and of taxes among the states. It was, according to Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story, writing in 1833, a matter of compromise and concession, confessedly unequal in its operation, but a necessary sacrifice to that spirit of conciliation, which was indispensable to the union of states having a great diversity of interests, and physical condition, and political institutions. Following the completion of each census, Congress is empowered to use the aggregate population in all the states, according to the prevailing constitutional rule for determining population, to determine the relative population of each state to the population of the whole, and, based on its calculations, to establish the appropriate size of the House and to allocate a particular number of representatives to each state according to its share of the national population. Since enactment of the Reapportionment Act of 1929, a constant 435 House seats have been apportioned among the states according to each census, and determining the size of the House is not presently part of the apportionment process. With one exception, the apportionment of 1842, the House of Representatives had been enlarged by various degrees from 65 members in 1788 to 435 members by 1913. The determination of size was made based on the aggregate national population, so long as the size of the House did not exceed 1 member for every 30,000 of the country's total population, nor the size of any state's delegation exceed 1 for every 30,000 of that state's population. With the size of the House still fixed at 435, the current ratio, as of the 2010 census, is around 1 representative, 700,000 citizens. Although the first sentence in this clause originally concerned apportionment of both House seats and taxes among the several states, the 14th Amendment sentence that replaced it in 1868 mentioned only the apportionment of House seats. Even so, the constraint placed upon Congress's taxation power remained, as the restriction was reiterated in Article 1 Section 9 Clause 4. The amount of direct taxes that could be collected by the federal government from the people in any state would still be tied directly to that state's share of the national population. Due to this restriction, Application of the income tax to income derived from real estate and specifically income in the form of dividends from personal property ownership such as stock shares was found to be unconstitutional because it was not apportioned among the states, that is to say, there was no guarantee that a state with 10% of the country's population paid 10% of those income taxes collected, because Congress had not fixed an amount of money to be raised and apportioned it between the states according to their respective shares of the national population. To permit the levying of such an income tax, Congress proposed and the states ratified the 16th Amendment, which removed the restriction by specifically providing that Congress could levy a tax on income from whatever source derived without it being apportioned among the states or otherwise based on a state's share of the national population. Clause 4, Vacancies. When vacancies happen in the representation from any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. Section 2, Clause 4, provides that when vacancies occur in the House of Representatives, it is not the job of the House of Representatives to arrange for a replacement, but the job of the state whose vacant seat is up for refilling. Moreover, the state governor may not appoint a temporary replacement, but must instead arrange for a special election to fill the vacancy. The original qualifications and procedures for holding that election are still valid. Clause 5, Speaker and other officers, Impeachment. The House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other officers, and shall have the sole power of impeachment. Section 2 further provides that the House of Representatives may choose its Speaker and its other officers. Though the Constitution does not mandate it, every Speaker has been a member of the House of Representatives. The Speaker rarely presides over routine House sessions, choosing instead to deputize a junior member to accomplish the task. Finally, Section 2 grants to the House of Representatives the sole power of impeachment. Although the Supreme Court has not had an occasion to interpret this specific provision, the Court has suggested that the grant to the House of the sole power of impeachment makes the House the exclusive interpreter of what constitutes an impeachable offense. This power, which is analogous to the bringing of criminal charges by a grand jury, has been used only rarely. The House has begun impeachment proceedings 62 times since 1789, and 19 federal officials have been formally impeached as a result, including 2 presidents, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, 1 cabinet secretary, William W. Belknap, 1 senator, William Blount, 1 Supreme Court Associate Justice, Samuel Chase, and 14 federal judges. The Constitution does not specify how impeachment proceedings are to be initiated. Until the early 20th century, a House member could rise and propose an impeachment, which would then be assigned to a committee for investigation. Presently, it is the House Judiciary Committee that initiates the process and then, after investigating the allegations, prepares recommendations for the whole House's consideration. If the House votes to adopt an impeachment resolution, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee recommends a slate of managers, whom the House subsequently approves by resolution. These representatives subsequently become the prosecution team in the impeachment trial in the Senate, see Section 3, Clause 6 below. Section 3, Senate. Clause 1, Composition, Election of Senators. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof, for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. The first clause of Section 3 provides that each state is entitled to have 2 senators, who would be elected by its state legislature, now by the people of each state, serve for staggered 6-year terms, and have 1 vote each. By these provisions, the framers of the Constitution intended to protect the interests of the states as states. This clause has been superseded by the 17th Amendment, ratified in 1913, which, in part, provides as amended, that the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, elected by the people thereof, for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. Article 5 specifies the means by which the Constitution of the United States can be amended. It ends by temporarily shielding 3 Article I clauses from being amended. This clause is among them. The others are first and fourth clauses in Section 9. Article 5 provides that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. Thus, no individual state may have its individual representation in the Senate adjusted without its consent. That is to say, an amendment that changed this clause to provide that all states would get only one senator, or 3 senators, or any other number, could become valid as part of the Constitution if ratified by 3/4 of the states. However, one that provided for some basis of representation other than strict numerical equality, for example, population, wealth, or land area, would require the unanimous consent of all the states. Denying the states their intended role as joint partners in the federal government by abolishing their equality in the Senate would, according to Chief Justice Salmon P. Chase, in Texas v. White, destroy the grounding of the Union. This Article V provision has been employed by those opposed to contemplated constitutional amendments that would grant the District of Columbia full representation in the Congress without also granting it statehood. Their argument is that an amendment that would allow a non-state district to have 2 senators would deprive the states of their equal suffrage in the Senate and would therefore require unanimous ratification by all the states. Whether unanimous consent of the 50 states would be required for such an amendment to become operative remains an unanswered political question. Clause 2, Classification of Senators, Vacancies. Immediately after they shall be assembled in consequence of the first election, they shall be divided as equally as may be into 3 classes. The seats of the senators of the first class shall be vacated at the expiration of the second year, of the second class at the expiration of the 4th year, and of the third class at the expiration of the 6th year, so that 1/3 may be chosen every second year, and if vacancies happen by resignation, or otherwise, during the recess of the legislature of any state, the executive thereof may make temporary appointments until the next meeting of the legislature, which shall then fill such vacancies. After the first group of senators was elected to the first Congress, 1789 to 1791, the senators were divided into 3 classes as nearly equal in size as possible, as required by this section. This was done in May 1789 by lot. It was also decided that each state's senators would be assigned to 2 different classes. Those senators grouped in the first class had their term expire after only 2 years, those senators in the second class had their term expire after only 4 years, instead of 6. After this, all senators from those states have been elected to 6-year terms, and as new states have joined the Union, their Senate seats have been assigned to 2 of the 3 classes, maintaining each grouping as nearly equal in size as possible. In this way, election is staggered, approximately 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years, but the entire body is never up for re-election in the same year, as contrasted with the House, where its entire membership is up for re-election every 2 years. As originally established, senators were elected by the legislature of the state they represented in the Senate. If a senator died, resigned, or was expelled, the legislature of the state would appoint a replacement to serve out the remainder of the senator's term. If the state legislature was not in session, its governor could appoint a temporary replacement to serve until the legislature could elect a permanent replacement. This was superseded by the 17th Amendment, which provided for the popular election of senators, instead of their appointment by the state legislature. In a nod to the less populist nature of the Senate, the amendment tracks the vacancy procedures for the House of Representatives in requiring that the governor call a special election to fill the vacancy, but, unlike in the House, it vests in the state legislature the authority to allow the governor to appoint a temporary replacement until the special election is held. Note, however, that under the original Constitution, the governors of the states were expressly allowed by the Constitution to make temporary appointments. The current system, under the 17th Amendment, allows governors to appoint a replacement only if their state legislature has previously decided to allow the governor to do so, otherwise, the seat must remain vacant until the special election is held to fill the seat, as in the case of a vacancy in the House. Clause 3, Qualifications of Senators. No person shall be a senator who shall not have attained to the age of 30 years, and been 9 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen. A senator must be at least 30 years of age, must have been a citizen of the United States for at least 9 years before being elected, and must reside in the state he or she will represent at the time of the election. The Supreme Court has interpreted the qualifications clause as an exclusive list of qualifications that cannot be supplemented by a House of Congress exercising its Section 5 authority to judge the qualifications of its own members, or by a state in its exercise of its Section 4 authority to prescribe the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives. Clause 4, Vice President as President of Senate. See also, List of tie-breaking votes cast by Vice Presidents of the United States. The Vice President of the United States shall be President of the Senate, but shall have no vote, unless they be equally divided. Section 3 provides that the Vice President is the President of the Senate. Excepting the duty to receive the tally of electoral votes for President, this is the only regular responsibility assigned to the office of the Vice President by the Constitution. When serving in this capacity, the Vice President, who is not a member of the Senate, may cast tie-breaking votes. Early in the nation's history, Vice Presidents frequently presided over the Senate. In modern times, the Vice President usually does so only during ceremonial occasions or when a tie in the voting is anticipated. Through January 24, 2018, a tie-breaking vote has been cast 263 times by 36 different Vice Presidents. Clause 5, President pro tempore and other officers. The Senate shall choose their other officers, and also a President pro tempore, in the absence of the Vice President, or when he shall exercise the office of the President of the United States. Clause 5 provides for a President pro tempore of the Senate, a senator elected to the post by the Senate, to preside over the body when the Vice President is either absent or exercising the office of the President. Although the constitutional text seems to suggest to the contrary, the Senate's current practice is to elect a full-time President pro tempore at the beginning of each Congress, as opposed to making it a temporary office only existing during the Vice President's absence. Since World War II, the senior, longest-serving, member of the majority party has filled this position. As is true of the Speaker of the House, the Constitution does not require that the President pro tempore be a senator, but by convention, a senator is always chosen. Clause 6, Trial of Impeachment. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. Clause 6 grants to the Senate the sole power to try impeachments and spells out the basic procedures for impeachment trials. The Supreme Court has interpreted this clause to mean that the Senate has exclusive and unreviewable authority to determine what constitutes an adequate impeachment trial. Of the 19 federal officials formally impeached by the House of Representatives, 11 were acquitted and 7 were convicted by the Senate. On one occasion, in the case of Senator William Blount, the Senate declined to hold a trial, asserting that it had no jurisdiction over its own members. The Constitution's framers vested the Senate with this power for several reasons. First, they believed senators would be better educated, more virtuous, and more high-minded than members of the House of Representatives and thus uniquely able to decide responsibly the most difficult of political questions. Second, they believed that the Senate, being a numerous body, would be well suited to handle the procedural demands of an impeachment trial, in which it, unlike judges and the judiciary system, would never be tied down by such strict rules, either in the delineation of the offense by the prosecutor, or in the construction of it by judges, as in the common cases serve to limit the discretion of courts in favor of personal security. Alexander Hamilton, The Federalist No. 65. There are 3 constitutionally mandated requirements for impeachment trials. The provision that senators must sit on oath or affirmation was designed to impress upon them the extreme seriousness of the occasion. The stipulation that the Chief Justice is to preside over presidential impeachment trials underscores the solemnity of the occasion and aims to avoid the possible conflict of interest of a vice president's presiding over the proceeding for the removal of the one official standing between him, or her, and the presidency. The specification that a two-thirds supermajority vote of those senators present is necessary in order to convict designed to facilitate serious deliberation and to make removal possible only through a consensus that cuts across factional divisions. Clause 7, Judgment in cases of impeachment, punishment on conviction. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States, but the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment, according to law. If any officer is convicted on impeachment, he or she is immediately removed from office, and may be barred from holding any public office in the future. No other punishments may be inflicted pursuant to the impeachment proceeding, but the convicted party remains liable to trial and punishment in the courts for civil and criminal charges. Section 4, Congressional Elections. Clause 1, Time, Place, and Manner of Holding. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.